Big health story out today that you need to know about. Health-conscious Canadians know all about the sodium in processed foods and snacks. A new report might have you second-guessing that slice of bread. The report by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States shows that bread products are the top source of sodium in the American diet. And the doughy culprits are at the top of the list for Canadian diets too. Joining me to talk more about this is Dr. Karl Kabasele in Toronto. So just because this American study, Dr. Karl, it applies just as much to the bread eaters in this country. Is that right?
It certainly does. And you may be puzzled. You may think, well, why aren't cold cuts or soups or cheeses the #1 source of sodium? And the answer is actually volume. So we consume so much bread from day to day, whether it's in sandwiches, toast, rolls, croissant, we've got it all here, that over time it adds up to about 7.5% of our daily diet.
Okay, so how much bread are we supposed to eat on a daily basis?
Well, that's an interesting question because
according to the Canada Food Guide, I think they recommend something like 2 to 4 slices.
Right, but when we're talking about sodium, it's really about reading the labels. So depending on what kind of bread product you're consuming, it will depend on how high that level of sodium is. And I think what this new report is really encouraging people to do, until the government can sort of rein in some of this salt, we need to read our labels and make the best choices we can based on the information we have.
How much sodium is in a piece of bread?
Again, I think that depends on the individual sort of product, so it's hard to kind of nail that down. But what we can say is that the average Canadian is consuming somewhere around 3,400 milligrams of sodium, where the upper limit should be 2,300.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so a big portion of that, since we're eating a lot of bread, we're getting a big portion of that from bread.
That's right.
Okay. Is there such a thing as salt-free bread, I wonder, or sodium-free bread, or do they need it to keep it fresh?
Well, I think it's partly for flavor, partly for extending shelf life. And I think the answer is that there are other ways of achieving those ends, you know, having more flavorful and long-lasting bread. And I guess that will be the challenge of the food industry if they are required to reduce the amount of sodium in these products.
What happens if somebody, Dr. Karl, wants to say, look, I'm just not, you know what, maybe it's time to drop the bread. Do we miss some great nutrients if we don't have bread in our diet?
Well, hopefully. Now, the problem with bread is that it is a processed food, technically. So, yes, it is made of wheat and other sort of grains. But if you're going for whole wheat or whole grain bread, you're probably getting the nutrients that you need, whereas obviously white bread is not so much. So it's not that we actually, you know, sort of absolutely need bread, but it can be a great source of fiber and other vitamins and minerals.
So what are some great alternatives?
To eating bread? Well, you do need carbs, so of course there are things like rice and you know, sweet potatoes and, you know, other sort of nutritional, or fruits and vegetables are another source of carbs, obviously. So, and these are sources where you're not only getting your carbs and your fiber, but you're getting other phytochemicals and other things that benefit your nutrition.
You know what's weird about this study is that at first glance you see snacks like chips and popcorn are at the bottom of the top 10 list while bread is at the top.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the other sort of anti-intuitive thing is that the salt that you add at the table, and even the salt that you add when you're cooking, is maybe 10% of your overall salt intake. So I think, again, that underscores the fact that we sort of make assumptions about salt and where we're getting it, and we really do need to read our labels and be more cognizant of where the salt actually is coming from.
Okay, one more question for people out there who aren't intimately familiar with this. What's the danger of too much sodium in your diet?
So in general, when we talk about restricting salt or sodium intake, it's to preserve heart health. When you have too much salt, what it can do is raise your blood pressure, and even though you may feel perfectly fine, blood pressure is, or high blood pressure is one of those things we call a silent killer, because it increases your risk of heart attack and stroke and kidney disease and a whole host of other vascular and cardiac diseases. So you really do need to try your best to maintain a healthy blood pressure.
All right, Dr. Karl Kabasele in Toronto, thank you. And you're not going to eat all that bread, are you?
No, indeed, I will not.